Today, we're going to dive into one of the most incredible transformations in all of literary history. It's the story of how English storytelling went from the harsh, brutal poetry of ancient warrior halls all the way to the sharp, funny, and deeply human world of medieval pilgrimages. This is a story about how our language, and the way we tell stories with it, was completely reforged in fire.
Just listen to this for a second. Tha cometh more under mistelium, Grendel Gangan, Godis Juraver. Now, believe it or not, that is English. Well, Old English, from the epic poem Beowulf. It's describing the monster Grendel dragging God's own anger with him as he comes stalking from the misty moors. I mean, just the sound of it, all those hard percussive sounds, it feels ancient, almost alien. It is absolutely the language of warriors and monsters.
And here's what it means. Then came off the moors. Under the mist bands, Grendel went, God's anger he bore. The gap between how that sounds and what we understand today is just massive. So how in the world did we get from that to the English we speak now? Well, the answer isn't just about time passing. It's a story of a violent conquest, a huge cultural collision, and some absolutely mind-blowing creativity. Which brings us to the central question of this whole explainer, and it's a bit of a paradox. How could a massive, violent foreign invasion actually be the very thing that created the guy we now call the father of English literature? It sounds totally backward, right? But, as you're about to see, that is exactly what happened.
Okay, first, let's set the scene. We need to go back to Anglo-Saxon England, way before the French showed up. This was the world of Old English.
So, I want you to forget everything you know about curling up with a good book. In this world, literature was a performance. You have to picture a scop, a kind of poet-performer, in a huge, crowded mead hall, chanting these epic tales of heroes and monsters, with a huge fire roaring in the middle of the room. It was loud, it was communal, and it was unbelievably dramatic.
You see, this whole literary world was built on an oral tradition. It was all about heroes, and it had this really distinct, punchy, rhythmic style called alliterative verse. These stories were alive, passed from person to person, and really, the only reason we have them today is because of the unsung heroes of this story, the scribes, who spent countless hours painstakingly copying these spoken tales onto parchment, basically capturing lightning in a bottle. And then, it happened. In one single world-changing year, everything changed. A massive collision was coming, one that would completely remix the English language and its literature forever.
The year was 1066. William the Conqueror and his Norman-French army invaded and took over Anglo-Saxon England. Now, this event didn't just swap out one king for another. It set off a linguistic earthquake that fundamentally changed the English language itself, and that's what paved the way for Geoffrey Chaucer hundreds of years later.
So after 1066, England basically became this linguistic layer cake. You had the new bosses, the king and his court, all speaking French. You had the church and all the scholars using Latin. And what about the common folk? Well, they kept right on speaking English, but now their language was like a sponge, just soaking up thousands and thousands of new words from the languages of power all around them.
And you can see this dynamic perfectly right here. Think about it. The Anglo-Saxon farmer, the guy out in the fields actually raising the animals, he used the Old English words cow, swine, sheep. But the Norman lord, the one sitting at the dinner table getting served the food, he used the new, fancy French-derived words beef, pork, and mutton. The entire social hierarchy was baked right into the vocabulary of dinner.
So this new, richer, much more flexible version of English, the language we now call Middle English, it didn't just sound different. It literally opened up the door for brand new kinds of stories, stories that you just couldn't have told before. The old heroic epic, like Beowulf, started to give way to something new, the chivalric romance. The whole focus shifted. It wasn't about a warrior defending his entire tribe anymore. Now it was about an individual knight, and his quests were really tests of his inner virtue, his honor, his courtesy, his moral compass. A fantastic example is the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I mean, this bizarre, totally supernatural green warrior shows up and challenges the court to a beheading game. But the real story isn't the axe swinging. It's the intense psychological and moral journey Gawain has to go on to uphold his end of the bargain a year later. It's a huge shift from external battles to internal struggles.
Okay, another really powerful new storytelling tool was the dream vision. It's a clever trick, right? By setting a story inside a dream, a writer could completely break free from the rules of reality. This allowed them to explore really complex ideas about society, religion, and philosophy in this deeply symbolic, almost surreal way.
And a poem like Piers Plowman takes this dream idea and just runs with it. He uses the dream framework to launch this massive, sweeping critique of 14th century English society. See, the dream wasn't an escape from reality, it was a powerful lens to see the waking world even more clearly, with all its corruption and hypocrisy on full display.
And all of these new ideas, these new genres, they all flow into one towering figure, Geoffrey Chaucer. This guy was a courtier, a world traveler, and an absolute genius who saw the incredible artistic potential of this new, messy, beautiful Middle English. And by choosing to write his masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales, in the everyday language of London, he basically elevated it, legitimized it, and set it on the path to becoming the language we all speak today.
So what was Chaucer's secret weapon? It was a genre called estates satire. The idea was to look at the three big social classes, or estates, the clergy who pray, the nobility who fight, and the peasantry who work. Chaucer would present these characters who are supposed to be perfect examples of their class, and then, with this really clever, subtle wit, he'd show you the massive gap between who they were supposed to be and who they really were.
This is a perfect example. I love this one. So Chaucer describes a nun. She's taken a vow of poverty, so her job is to care for the poor. But what does Chaucer show us? He tells us she keeps these little pet dogs and feeds them roasted meat and fine white bread, food that most of the actual poor people at the time could only dream of. It's such a quiet but absolutely devastating critique, and it's all done with a little smile.
But hang on, literature in this period wasn't just for educated people at court. At the same time, it was literally exploding into the streets and becoming this huge public spectacle for everyone.
And these were the mystery plays. For the first time, the biggest stories from the Bible, I mean everything from the Garden of Eden to the Final Judgment, were being performed in the common language for everybody to see. And the coolest part? Each local craft guild, like the shipbuilders or the bakers, would sponsor and act out a part of the story that related to their trade.
You gotta understand, this was a medieval blockbuster event. The entire city became the stage. These decorated pageant carts, kind of like parade floats, would roll from one spot to the next performing their scene. It was an all-day, sometimes even multi-day festival that brought the whole community together to see these foundational stories come to life.
So, from a warrior's chant in a smoky hall to a massive public play in the city square, we've seen a total revolution. But why does any of this ancient history still matter to the stories we watch and read today?
It matters because this period basically created the DNA of modern storytelling. Seriously, the inner conflict of that chivalric knight, that's the great-great-grandfather of every complicated, morally gray hero we love today. The structure of the epic quest is the blueprint for just about every fantasy adventure you can think of. And Chaucer's sharp, witty satire, that gave us the tools we still use to question authority and expose hypocrisy.
And all that leaves us with one last thought. You know, we often call this period the Dark Ages, but its stories are filled with so much light and complexity and humor that they still feel bright today. And it makes you wonder, hundreds of years from now, when people look back at our time, what stories, in our movies, our books, our TV shows, even our memes, what are the stories that will define who we really were?